pregnant waitress poured wine on her husband's mistress at a luxury gala. The ballroom shifted. Everyone froze. No one expected what happened next, especially when her own husband chose the other woman. Stay till the end. Subscribe to this channel because justice doesn't knock. It kicks the door in. Don't touch me. The words came out sharp, quieter than the music, but somehow louder than everything else. Heads turned. Conversations paused mid-sentence. And just like that, the entire ballroom shifted. Hilda froze for half a second, her chest rising too fast, her fingers instinctively pressing against the curve of her stomach. 7 months pregnant. Exhausted. Already aching from hours on her feet. She hadn't meant to say it out loud. But the grip on her wrist had been tight. Possessive. Humiliating. Susan Benson slowly released her. Not because she had to. Because she wanted to. Because she knew everyone was watching. "Oh," Susan said, smoothing an invisible crease from her gold dress, her voice smooth as glass. "So the help speaks." A few quiet laughs rippled through the nearby guests. Not loud. Not bold. Just enough to sting. Hilda swallowed, her throat dry. The tray in her hands felt heavier than it should. Crystal glasses clinked softly, betraying the slight tremor in her grip. "Ma'am," she said carefully, keeping her voice low, controlled. "I just need to get through." Susan stepped directly into her path, blocking her. Smiling. "No," she said lightly. "I think you need to learn how to stand still when you're spoken to." A man nearby let out a low whistle under his breath. Another guest leaned toward her friend and whispered, "This is about to get interesting." Hilda heard it. Of course she did. She heard everything. The whispers. The laughter. The judgment. It was the same everywhere, just dressed up differently in rooms like this. Crystal chandeliers. Silk gowns. Expensive perfume. Same cruelty. Different packaging. "Please," Hilda tried again, her voice quieter now. "I don't want any trouble." Susan tilted her head, studying her as if she'd just discovered something mildly amusing. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured. "You already are trouble. Look at you." Her gaze dropped deliberately to Hilda's stomach. Lingering. Judging. The air shifted. A few guests exchanged glances. Even the ones enjoying the show felt that line. But Susan didn't care. In fact, she leaned in closer. "You know what I don't understand," she continued, lowering her voice just enough to sound intimate, cruel enough to cut deeper. "Why women like you insist on bringing mistakes into places like this." Hilda's fingers tightened around the tray. Her jaw clenched. "Still," she said nothing. "Not here. Not tonight." Then, she heard the voice. "Is there a problem?" The voice cut clean through the tension. Hilda turned. And everything inside her dropped. Felix. Her husband. Standing there as he belonged. Like he hadn't ignored her for weeks. Like he hadn't vanished the moment things got hard. Like he hadn't left her to figure everything out alone. He looked good. Too good. Tailored tuxedo. Confident posture. The kind of man people respected at first glance. And right now, he wasn't looking at her like his wife. He was looking at her like a problem. Susan's smile widened as she slipped her arm through his. "Oh, perfect," she said smoothly. "You're just in time." Felix's gaze moved from Susan to Hilda. Paused. Dropped. To her uniform. To her stomach. Then back to her face. Something flickered. Recognition. Then, gone. Replaced by something colder. "What are you doing here?" he asked. Not concerned. Not shocked. Annoyance. Hilda felt her chest tighten. "I work here," she said quietly. Susan blinked. Then laughed. "Oh my God," she said, turning slightly so the people around them could hear. "This is your wife." The word hung in the air. Wife. It didn't sound real coming from her mouth. Felix didn't answer immediately. That silence said everything. Susan's laugh softened into something sharper. "That's unfortunate," she added. A few guests shifted awkwardly. Others leaned closer. Phones subtly lifted. Hilda felt it again. That pressure. That invisible weight of being watched, judged, reduced. But this time, something inside her didn't shrink. It steadied. "Excuse me," she said, trying to move past them. "I need to serve." Susan stepped in front of her again. Of course she did. "Relax," she said lightly. "We're just talking." Felix exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. "Hilda," he said under his breath, his tone tightening. "Not here. Don't do this here." Hilda blinked. "Don't do this?" Her lips parted slightly, disbelief flickering across her face. "I'm working," she said. "And you're embarrassing me," he snapped quietly. That landed hard. A nearby guest muttered under his breath. "Wow." Another whispered. "He really said that to her?" Susan's eyes lit up. She loved this. The tension. The attention. The control. "You know what?" she said suddenly, reaching toward Hilda's tray. Before Hilda could react, Susan picked up a glass of red wine. She held it up, examining it like it was part of the entertainment. "This is actually perfect," she murmured. Hilda's heart started to pound. "Give that back," she said, more firmly now. Susan ignored her. Instead, she turned slightly, making sure the right people had a clear view. "You see," she said, addressing no one and everyone at once, "there's a certain standard in rooms like this." Her eyes flicked back to Hilda. "And then there are exceptions." A few uncomfortable laughs. Someone coughed. A man near the back whispered, "This is getting out of hand." Another replied, "I'm not missing this." Hilda felt heat rise behind her eyes. Not tears. Something else. Something sharper. Felix leaned in slightly, his voice low and tense. "Just apologize and go," he muttered. "You're making a scene." Hilda looked at him. Really looked at him. At the man who was supposed to stand beside her, protect her. Instead, he was asking her to shrink. Again. Something cracked. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But permanently. "If standing here is a scene," she said slowly, her voice steady now, "then what do you call what she's doing?" Felix's jaw tightened. Susan smirked. "Oh, I like her," she said lightly. "She's got a little fight in her." She stepped closer. Too close. Lowering her voice just enough for Hilda to feel it more than hear it. "But let me make something clear," Susan whispered. "You don't belong here. And deep down, you know it." Silence. Heavy. Thick. Uncomfortable. Hilda didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't look away. And for the first time, Susan's smile flickered. Just slightly. Because something about that stillness wasn't submission. It was something else. Something controlled. Something dangerous. Hilda adjusted her grip on the tray. Slowly. Carefully. Then tilted her head just a little. "Go ahead," she said softly. Susan paused. "What?" Hilda's gaze didn't waver. "You wanted a scene," she said. "Go ahead." The room stilled. Even the music felt quieter. Felix frowned. "Hilda." But Susan was already lifting the glass. Her smile returned. Wider now. Crueler. "Oh, don't worry," she said lightly. "I will." She raised it slightly. The deep red liquid catches the light. A few guests leaned in. Phones lifted higher. Someone whispered, "She wouldn't." Another replied, "Oh, she would." Hilda didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't break. Her hand rested gently over her stomach. Her breathing slow. Measured. And her eyes locked. Susan tilted the glass. Just enough. The first drop of wine trembled at the edge, ready to fall. And in that suspended moment, when the entire room held its breath, ask yourself this. If you were her, would you walk away or fight back? If you've ever been in a room where people decided your worth before you even spoke, where you were made to feel small, invisible, or out of place, stay with this story. Because what happens next? No one in that room is ready for it. And trust me, you don't want to miss it. The first drop never landed. Because Hilda moved first. Not fast. Not angry. Not shaking. Just certain. Her hand lifted from the tray with a smooth, deliberate motion, fingers wrapping around the stem of another glass before anyone registered what she was doing. Susan's smile was still forming, still confident, still cruel, when Hilda tilted her wrist and released. The red wine arced through the air in a clean, controlled splash, landing across Susan's gold dress in a deep, spreading stain. A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. Someone choked on their drink. A fork clattered loudly against porcelain. And for one suspended second, no one breathed. Susan froze. Her eyes dropped slowly, inch by inch, to the front of her dress. The stain bloomed like a bruise. Dark. Ugly. Permanent. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Not yet. Hilda lowered the empty glass back onto the tray. Gently. Like she was finishing a task. Not starting a war. I'm so sorry, she said calmly. But there was no apology in her voice. The silence cracked. Oh my, someone whispered. Did she just? No way. Phones lifted higher now. Not subtle anymore. Not hidden. Recording. Capturing. Waiting. Susan blinked once. Twice. Then her head snapped up. You, she started, her voice catching between disbelief and fury. You disgusting. Careful, Hilda said quietly. Not louder. Just firmer. It landed harder than shouting. Susan stopped mid-word. Not because she wanted to. Because something about that tone made her hesitate. And that hesitation? The room felt it. Felix didn't. He stepped forward immediately, grabbing Hilda's arm, harder than before. What is wrong with you? He snapped, his voice no longer controlled. Have you lost your mind? Hilda slowly turned her head to look at him. Really look at him. At the man who just watched her be humiliated, and only reacted when she defended herself. I found it, she said softly. Felix frowned. What? My mind, she replied. A few people nearby let out short, shocked laughs, half disbelief, half admiration. A man near the back muttered, Okay, she ate that. Another whispered, I shouldn't be enjoying this, but I am. Susan finally found her voice. You think this is funny, she hissed, her composure cracking as she tried to wipe the stain, only making it worse. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Hilda's hand rested lightly on her stomach again, grounding herself. I do, she said. Susan laughed sharply. Oh, you don't, she snapped. You just assaulted me in a room full of witnesses. You're finished. Finished. Hilda echoed. The word didn't sound like fear. It sounded like curiosity. Felix tightened his grip on her arm. Enough, he said through clenched teeth. You're going to apologize right now. Hilda looked down at his hand on her arm, then back at his face. Or what? She asked quietly. Felix's jaw flexed. Or you're going to regret it. That did it. Not the threat. Not the anger. The familiarity. The pattern. The way he said it was like he always had the upper hand. Hilda gently pulled her arm free. He didn't stop her this time. Because now, people were watching him, too. Closely. Judging. The shift was subtle, but real. You know what's interesting? Hilda said, Her voice calm, almost thoughtful. You keep talking about regret. Susan scoffed. Because you should be drowning in it. Hilda's gaze flicked between them. Measured. Unshaken. You really think this ends here? The question landed wrong. Not like a threat. Not like panic. Like a statement. Susan frowned slightly. What is that supposed to mean? Hilda didn't answer. And somehow, that was worse. A ripple moved through the crowd. People leaned in closer. Whispers picked up again. She's too calm. Something's off. Why isn't she scared? A man near the bar muttered. I've seen this before. Right before things go very bad. His friend blinked. For who? He didn't answer. Susan straightened, trying to regain control of the moment. You know what? She said sharply, raising her voice now. We're done entertaining this. She turned toward the room, forcing a laugh. Clearly, hiring standards need to be reviewed, she added loudly. A few weak chuckles. But not as many as before. Not as confident. Because now, there was doubt. Felix stepped in again, his tone colder. Security, he called out. That word cut through everything. Immediate. Final. 2 guards near the entrance straightened and started moving. The energy in the room shifted again. Not entertainment anymore. Now it was a consequence. Susan exhaled. Satisfied. Yes, she said, smoothing her hair despite the stain. Get her out. And call the police while you're at it. A sharp murmur spread. Police. That's a bit much. She's pregnant. Susan didn't care. She should have thought about that before she touched me, she snapped. Hilda didn't move. Didn't step back. Didn't plead. She just watched them. Watched the guards approaching. Watched Felix avoid her eyes now. Watched Susan try, and fail, to regain control of a moment that was slipping. And in that stillness, something about her presence began to feel different. Heavier. A woman in the crowd crossed her arms, shaking her head. This isn't right, she muttered. Another nodded. It's not. A man whispered. This is going to blow up. I can feel it. And if you've ever been in a moment like this, where everyone sees the truth but no one steps in, stay with this story. Subscribe. Because a silence like that, it never lasts. Not when the wrong person is being pushed. The guards were close now. Close enough to reach her. Susan's lips curled slightly. Felix finally looked at Hilda again. And for the first time, there was something new in his expression. Not anger. Not embarrassment. Uncertainty. Small. But growing. Hilda noticed. Of course she did. Her eyes held his for a brief second. Then shifted, past him, to someone else in the room. Someone who hadn't moved. Hadn't spoken. Hadn't looked away. Watching everything. Waiting. The guards stepped forward. Ma'am, one of them said, reaching out. You'll need to come with us. Hilda didn't resist. Didn't argue. Didn't say a word. But as her gaze lingered on that one silent observer, her lips curved. Just slightly. Like she knew something the rest of the room didn't. And that's when it started to feel less like she was being removed. And more like something was about to begin. Hilda didn't flinch as the 2 guards closed in, their polished shoes scraping the marble floor in a sharp rhythm. Her fingers rested lightly on her stomach, her mind steady despite the adrenaline thrumming in her chest. Susan leaned in close, face sharp as a blade. Do you hear that? Susan hissed, her words barely above a whisper but meant for everyone near. You're under arrest. Assault. Public humiliation. You think anyone will back you? Hilda's eyes swept the room. Guests had stopped talking, frozen mid-chatter. Phones hovered like drones in the air, recording. Whispers rippled faster than the crystal chandeliers above. She touched me first. a man muttered under his breath. Another voice, sharper this time, said, "Who's calling the cops at a gala anyway?" A woman near the buffet leaned over to her friend, shaking her head. "I swear, this is more entertaining than the auction." Then, a drunken laugh cut through the tension. A man in a loose tie, clearly too invested in the free-flowing wine, lifted his glass and slurred, "I paid for drama, not steak." The crowd chuckled nervously, a ripple of relief breaking the suffocating tension. Hilda's gaze didn't waver from the back of the room. She saw her, the small figure sitting in the corner, quiet but unmistakably observing. An elderly woman, dressed in understated elegance, with sharp eyes that had already missed nothing. Her lips pursed slightly as she watched, hands folded in front of her like she was weighing a decision. Susan noticed her too and flinched almost imperceptibly. She turned sharply back to Hilda, raising her voice so the guards could hear. "Do you understand what you've done? You think the world doesn't notice when someone like you disrespects people like us?" Felix, his face tight, stepped closer to Susan. "Enough. Let's just take her out quietly." "No," Hilda interrupted, her voice calm, measured. "This isn't quiet." The crowd shifted, a few leaning forward. Phones tilted. Everyone sensed something about to break. Susan's smirk faltered. "Excuse me." Hilda's eyes flicked toward the drunken man, who was now wobbling in place, still holding his wine like a scepter. "He gets it," she murmured under her breath. "We're all just trying to survive this circus." A ripple of suppressed laughter moved through the room. It wasn't loud, but it was a crack in Susan's fortress of control. She tightened her jaw. The guards reached out to Hilda, but she raised a hand, almost imperceptibly, and leaned back slightly. "Do your worst," she said softly, almost teasing. Susan's fury spiked. She stomped her heel, the sharp sound echoing through the ballroom. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? Arrested, humiliated, your husband. What's wrong with you?" Hilda's voice cut through, steady as steel. "What's wrong with me? I'm seeing the world as it is. And you're seeing yourself for the first time tonight." The tension drew tight around Susan's shoulders. Felix's mouth opened and closed, caught between anger and the growing awareness that the room wasn't on his side anymore. Guests were whispering, heads turning subtly towards Susan and Felix. The wine-stained gold dress wasn't just a mess, it was a symbol of their unraveling control. And then, movement. All eyes shifted to the elderly woman at the far end. She rose slowly, deliberately. Her posture straight, her gaze steady, every head in the room turning toward her. Even Susan's smile faltered as the woman's hands came together in front of her. The room went silent, the music paused mid-note as if waiting. Phones were pointed, recording, capturing every inch of this moment. The drunk guest beside the buffet muttered something unintelligible but managed to lean on a chair for balance. "Oh, this is gold." The elderly woman's eyes landed on Hilda for a long, deliberate moment. Then, with slow precision, she straightened completely and took a single step forward, her voice rising, soft at first, but carrying enough weight to silence the murmurs. "Enough," she said. The room froze. Guests leaned in. Susan's face tightened. Felix stepped back slightly, unsettled. The guards paused, unsure whether to advance or wait. "Enough of humiliation disguised as entertainment," the woman continued, her voice firm, commanding. "It ends tonight. All of it." A collective intake of breath swept through the room. Phones tilted, people whispered, and even the drunk man managed a wobbling. "Oh, I did not see this coming." Hilda's lips curved just slightly, barely perceptible, as if acknowledging an unseen ally in the chaos. The elderly woman's hand rose slowly, her fingers pointing just slightly towards Susan and Felix, her gaze unwavering. And that was the moment everyone knew. Everything was about to change. The guards hesitated. Susan's smirk was gone. Felix's composure cracked. And the woman standing tall? She wasn't done. And just like that, the room held its breath, waiting. Because the next move would change everything. The ballroom had shifted. What had started as tension now felt like a tide turning. Guests whispered fervently, glances darting from Susan's wine-stained dress to Hilda's calm, unshaken posture. Phones hovered like predatory birds, capturing every micro-expression, every falter in the facade of the so-called elite. "Honestly, she's done nothing wrong," a woman murmured to her neighbor, voice trembling with excitement. "You saw what she went through." Another man, half drunk but fully awake to the unfolding drama, leaned forward, waving his hand dismissively. "Yeah. I didn't pay for some rich lady's ego trip. I paid for a story." Hilda let her hand fall back to rest gently on her belly, taking a slow breath. She didn't need to defend herself. The crowd had already begun. Then someone near the balcony laughed sharply. "Oh, and by the way," he said, voice low but meant to travel, "looks like Susan's perfect marriage isn't so perfect." Heads turned. Phones angled. Guests gasped, a ripple of disbelief spreading faster than wildfire. A snippet of a private conversation, text, whispers, and a little too much overheard, was now floating into the open. Felix, caught in a very public web of deception, had been cheating. Evidence leaked. Photos, messages, subtle hints someone had noticed but no one dared speak of until now. Susan's eyes widened, jaw tight. She opened her mouth, ready to snarl, but the crowd no longer flinched. Phones captured her shock, her mascara running slightly from stress, or maybe from the earlier wine splash. Felix's face went pale. For once, his sharp tongue faltered. "This isn't, it's private," he barked. A nearby guest, smirking, raised his phone and let the screen flash in the direction of the tables. The messages, photos, everything, it was now public. Every eye in the room could see. And with that, the social tide turned. Guests leaned in for commentary, whispers of "finally," "about time," and "she deserved this," drifting through the room. Even Susan's closest allies shifted uneasily, suddenly aware that loyalty came with consequences. Hilda didn't move. She didn't gloat. She simply exhaled and let the moment breathe. Then someone near the bar laughed so hard they nearly fell off their chair. "I came here for steak and wine, but wow, this is better than reality TV." The tension cracked with relief, a small comic release that reminded everyone that no one had complete control. Not even Susan, not even Felix. The sound of laughter, nervous and genuine, threaded through the crowd. Hilda's lips curved just slightly at the edges. Not a smirk, not a victory grin, but a silent acknowledgement that justice had begun to tilt. Susan, desperate now, tried to regain control. "Everyone, stop. This isn't." But she couldn't. Phones were recording, whispers had turned to murmurs of support for Hilda, and the drunken guest continued his commentary, now wobbling toward the edge of the scene. "I swear, this pregnant girl's got more spine than the lot of you." "You've seen enough," Felix hissed, but the words landed on deaf ears. Hilda's eyes scanned the room. Every subtle nod of approval, every glance that said, "She has our back," strengthened her resolve. She realized in that moment that this wasn't just her fight. It was theirs too, quietly, courageously, in the way ordinary people speak when they finally see injustice. Her stomach tightened, not from fear, but from anticipation. The stakes had escalated. She could feel the energy in the air, shifting, bending, waiting. And then, the elderly woman, still standing near the back, finally spoke again, her voice slicing through the mixture of laughter, whispers, and murmurs. "I've seen this before. And it didn't end well for you." The room paused. Guests leaned in closer. Phones focused on the woman. Susan's smirk faltered completely, and Felix's eyes darted nervously around. The weight of those words landed like a hammer. Everyone in the ballroom felt it. And in that pregnant pause, the stakes became crystal clear. The power was about to shift entirely. The question lingered over the room like a storm cloud ready to break. Who really held the cards, and who would be left standing when the thunder hit? Susan's hands trembled. Felix's jaw tightened. And Hilda? She simply straightened her shoulders, ready. Because in that moment, everyone watching knew one truth. The next move would change everything. The elderly woman stepped fully into the center of the ballroom now, her cane tapping lightly against the polished floor, echoing like a subtle drumbeat. Every head turned. Even Susan's haughty mask faltered, her gold-stained dress catching the chandelier light like a warning signal. Felix's hand twitched, hovering near his phone as if to call security again, but he hesitated. Something in the woman's stance, the certainty in her gaze, froze him. "I've seen this play out before," she said, voice low but carrying. "People think power is untouchable. That arrogance has no cost." Her eyes flicked to Susan, sharp as glass. "But it does. Oh, it does." Murmurs rolled through the crowd. Phones shifted. Guests leaned forward, curiosity mixing with barely contained glee. Even the drunk man by the buffet steadied himself for a moment, muttering, "Oh, she's about to drop the bomb." Hilda's lips pressed together. Her heart beat fast, not from fear, but from recognition. This woman wasn't here to coddle her. She was here to reveal the truth. "I know what's been going on behind closed doors," the elderly woman continued. "Financial misconduct. Shell accounts. Hidden transfers. Deals that shouldn't exist. And some of you," her eyes landed on Felix, "have been complicit, thinking your reputations protect you." Felix's face blanched. His hands, which had been tightening into fists, suddenly trembled slightly. Susan's jaw clenched. The wine stain on her dress seemed to grow darker under the lights, as if the room itself mirrored her panic. A young intern, standing near the back with a notebook, whispered to her friend, "Wait, is she saying they're illegal?" Hilda's eyes narrowed. Every word the elderly woman spoke layered the room with revelation, tilting the social balance further in her favor. People weren't just watching, they were absorbing the proof of the villain's cracks. The elderly woman's gaze softened for a moment as it landed on Hilda. "I couldn't stand by and watch another young woman, pregnant, vulnerable, be humiliated the way I was." Hilda's breath caught. She hadn't expected sympathy. She had expected confrontation. Relief flickered in her chest, brief but bright, like a candle in a storm. Susan moved closer, trying to dominate the space, her voice a hiss. "You don't know what you're talking about." "You can't." But the room had already turned. Guests whispered support for Hilda, subtle nods, phone cameras pointed at Susan, catching every falter in her composure. The elderly woman continued, now speaking directly to Felix. "And you thought you could hide it all, didn't you? Thought no one would notice your little betrayals." Felix's mouth opened, closed, opened again. He looked like a man watching the walls crumble around him. I don't know what." The elderly woman held up a hand, cutting him off. "You know exactly what I mean. And I'm not alone tonight. Every whisper in this room, every phone recording, is a witness." A ripple of shock ran through the guests. Even Susan's closest allies shifted, suddenly aware that the stakes weren't just embarrassment, they were exposure, legal, irreversible. Hilda's mind flashed briefly, recalling Felix before everything fell apart. The man she had once trusted, before deceit layered over his charm, before his betrayal pierced her world. A memory surfaced, him laughing in the quiet of a sunlit park, gentle hands brushing her hair back, promises whispered in a time before fear. The contrast was painful. Tenderness turned to manipulation, trust turned to humiliation. She let herself inhale slowly. That was the past. Tonight wasn't about nostalgia. It was about justice. The elderly woman's eyes, sharp and unflinching, returned to the room, and she leaned slightly toward Hilda. Her voice dropped to a whisper, almost conspiratorial, yet the entire room heard. "Should I tell them? Or will you?" The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Every camera, every phone, every pair of eyes waited. Susan's lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. Felix's face went pale. Even the drunk man steadied his wobbling stance, sensing a climax about to unfold. Hilda's fingers grazed the edge of her tray, her connection to calm, her anchor, but her mind raced. She felt the weight of choice. Speak now, reveal the rest, take the full power of truth into her hands, or wait. Letting the elderly woman finish the unmasking. The crowd leaned forward, tension snapping tight like a drawn wire. Every heartbeat in the room echoed in Hilda's chest. And for a moment, she allowed herself to smile. Small, restrained, but electric. Justice was coming. And this time, no one would walk away untouched. The ballroom waited. The glasses of wine trembled in the hands of guests. Susan's eyes darted around, desperately searching for a lifeline. Felix's fingers twitched near the phone. And somewhere, in the back of the room, every camera, every whisper, every gaze was ready to witness the fall of their carefully constructed empire. The elderly woman stepped closer to the center, now holding a small folder she had produced from her bag. Just a hint of its contents, a subtle wave that suggested proof, without fully revealing the storm. "This isn't speculation," she said calmly, voice cutting through the murmurs. "These are records. Transactions that shouldn't exist. Decisions made behind closed doors. And some of you thought no one was watching." Susan's sharp inhale barely masked panic. She turned to Felix, voice cracking. This is your mess." Felix froze, fingers brushing the phone in his pocket as if to make a call, but hesitation held him in place. The evidence had a weight in the air, palpable and undeniable. Guests leaned in, murmuring, phones poised to broadcast every reaction. One investor, holding a glass of champagne, raised an eyebrow and muttered loud enough to carry. "I came for champagne, not prison proximity." Laughter rippled through the room, a fragile comic relief that made some exhale and allowed tension to crack for just a moment. But Susan's glare could cut steel. "Everyone shut up. You don't know what you're talking about," she snapped. The elderly woman's gaze never wavered. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about. And now, so does everyone else in this room. The contracts, the accounts, the shell companies, they're all linked to the two of you. And yes," she said, her voice dropping just slightly, "that includes the gala's sponsors. Investors are already seeing this." Phones buzzed. Messages popped up in real time across the room. Investors' whispers grew louder. "I'm pulling out. Transfer frozen. Reconsidering all ties." The social momentum shifted violently. The power Susan had clung to for years was evaporating in real time, like mist in the sun. Susan's eyes darted frantically. "Felix, do something." But Felix couldn't. The tide had turned. Whispers became murmurs, murmurs became discussion, and suddenly the room was alive with people siding with Hilda. Guests glanced at each other, approving nods passing between those who had once been silent. Phones streamed everything live. Hilda kept her composure. Her hands rested lightly over her stomach, but her eyes didn't leave Susan and Felix. She wasn't smiling, not yet, but there was a quiet intensity, a calm that unsettled the guilty parties. Then, a sharp sound from the entrance, a uniformed officer's boots clicking on the marble floor. Heads swiveled. Phones lifted. Cameras zoomed. Susan's eyes widened, her voice faltering as she tried to regain control. "They can't just wait, who?" Felix stammered. It's not." A hush fell. The police weren't announcing anything yet. No one knew if they were coming for Susan, Felix, or someone else entirely. The suspense sliced through the tension, each second stretching painfully. The drunk investor near the buffet swayed slightly, glass raised. "Well, this just got interesting," he slurred, laughing nervously. "I came for champagne, now I get a front row seat to a felony drama. Fantastic." The guests couldn't stop leaning forward. The elderly woman, her posture unshaken, held the folder slightly higher, letting its presence imply authority without exposing everything. "You've underestimated people like her before," she said, her eyes locking on Hilda. "Tonight, that mistake will cost you everything." Susan's hands fluttered, searching for a lifeline. while Felix's face drained of color. Hilda's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the power of the moment. She had survived humiliation, but now she had momentum, and the guilty knew it. And then, a voice from the far side of the room, the doorman, whispering urgently to a manager, confirmed it. They're on their way. Police are coming. Susan turned sharply, eyes darting to every entrance, her voice cracking. For who? Who called them? The elderly woman's lips curved slightly, a faint, knowing smile that hinted at the next revelation. That, my dear, is for you to find out, if you survive long enough to see it. Phones were raised higher. Guests leaned forward. Laughter, shock, panic, every emotion tangled together like sparks in a storm. The gala had become a live stage for consequences, and no one in the room could look away. Hilda's stomach tightened slightly, but her eyes held focus. She knew the moment she had been waiting for was about to arrive. The tension in the air was a promise. Justice was coming, and it would be swift, shocking, and inescapable. And just like that, everything hung on the question: who would the police come for first, and who would fall? The ballroom felt electric, but now the electricity was jagged, unpredictable. Phones floated in the air like surveillance drones, capturing every twitch of Susan's face, every faltering step of Felix. Guests leaned forward, murmuring, gasping, whispering, their voices overlapping into a chaotic symphony of shock and anticipation. Felix's hands trembled. It's not, she's overreacting, he barked, voice rising despite the room's heavy silence. This isn't. It's just a misunderstanding. Susan snapped her fingers at a passing server. Get them out. The pregnant woman, her, she's causing a scene. Hilda didn't flinch. Calm radiated from her like steel wrapped in silk. She rested one hand gently on her belly, the other at her side, and let the tension settle on the guilty parties instead. You didn't lose me tonight, she said, her voice low, measured, carrying just enough fire to make every whispering guest lean in. You lost yourself a long time ago. A hush fell. The line landed like a hammer. Guests straightened. Phones paused mid-recording, if only for a second, as the weight of truth hit the room. Susan's lips quivered. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, realizing that words could no longer armor her. Felix's face twitched with frustration. This isn't fair. Oh, it's fair, Hilda interrupted, calm but sharp. You decided to humiliate someone who had nothing but decency. You forgot that the world sees more than your carefully polished lies. Guests leaned closer, some murmuring in agreement, some whispering to neighbors. Laughter bubbled briefly from a woman near the back, shaking her head. I didn't think I'd get a front row seat to justice tonight. And wine, finally worth it, she muttered. The moment cracked some tension, comic relief threading through the chaos. Susan's face paled. We can fix this. We can. Hilda shook her head, letting the gesture be her answer. No words necessary. Every eye in the room caught the silent power radiating from her. She was no longer the girl humiliated at the start of the gala. She was a force of consequence. Then, a murmur spread, low at first, growing louder. Guests were talking. Phones were capturing snippets of financial misconduct, hidden emails, transfers, and shell companies. Layer by layer, the truth began to ripple through the room. Investors near the edges began whispering among themselves, some shaking their heads, others reaching for their phones. Pull out. Everything stops. Freeze transfers, one investor hissed, glancing nervously at Felix. Felix's face twisted with panic. This isn't. You can't. Susan's hand trembled, and her mascara smudged along her cheek. She had tried to control the narrative, tried to hold on to an empire built on lies, but every thread was unraveling at once. A server tripped slightly, spilling a tray of champagne in a small arc that mirrored the chaos, and someone near the bar muttered under their breath. I paid for a gala, got a reality show instead. Perfect. Laughter echoed briefly, tension releasing like a spring. Then the unmistakable sound of boots clicked across the marble floors. Heads turned sharply. The room froze, everyone looking toward the entrance. The police had arrived. The uncertainty hung thick. Who were they coming for first? Susan? Felix? Someone else entirely? Susan's voice cracked, a whisper full of fear. No, it can't be. They can't. Felix stepped forward, trying to intercept, but the officers moved past him, eyes scanning the room, calm and efficient. Their presence made the whispers grow louder, the phones record faster, and the truth more immediate. Hilda's heart thumped, not with fear, but with the quiet exhilaration of watching balance return. For the first time, she didn't feel alone. The crowd, the elderly woman, the phones capturing every moment, they were all allies in a silent chorus of justice. The officers paused, hands on their belts, surveying the guilty pair. Susan's eyes darted to Felix, then back to the police, pleading silently. Felix swallowed hard, realizing that no words, no manipulation, could stop the tide now. Hilda straightened, shoulders relaxed but commanding. The pregnant woman who had started the night humiliated was now untouchable in her integrity. And everyone knew it. And just like that, the ballroom held its breath. The officers were poised. The phones were recording. The world outside was about to watch the fall of people who had believed themselves untouchable. Susan opened her mouth, then closed it again, unsure what to say. Felix's hands twitched toward his jacket as if trying to hide some secret weapon, some control, but none existed anymore. The officers moved with precision, ignoring protests, moving straight toward the couple at the center of the chaos. You're arresting us? Susan gasped, voice shrill. This is a mistake. She's the one. The lead officer shook his head slowly, calm, unwavering. Step aside, ma'am. You and your husband are under arrest for fraud, financial misconduct, and endangering investors. You have the right to remain silent. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, exclamations. Phones recorded every second. Investors' eyes widened, some cheering quietly, some shaking their heads in disbelief. A woman near the buffet clutched her pearls and muttered, "I came for a gala, not a trial. Best entertainment ever." Laughter rippled across the edges, a perfect comedic release in the midst of tension. Hilda's chest rose and fell slowly, her hand resting lightly on her belly. Relief swept through her, but it was tempered by a calm clarity. She hadn't sought revenge, hadn't wanted chaos, just justice. Yet watching the people who had humiliated, threatened, and conspired unravel in real time, the satisfaction was visceral. Susan's mask had completely shattered. Makeup smeared, gold dress rumpled, face pale. Felix's sharp suits no longer shielded him. He looked every bit the man stripped of power and control. The whispers of finally, about time, and she didn't deserve that, spread across the room like wildfire. The elderly woman leaned on her cane, a subtle smirk on her lips. She had orchestrated nothing openly, yet her presence had shifted the entire room. Hilda caught her gaze, the silent acknowledgement of an ally who had been through similar storms and survived. The officers guided Susan and Felix toward the exit. Guests whispered warnings, some shook their heads, some recorded every last falter of the fallen couple. The room's energy was electric, shock, relief, validation, all tangled together. Hilda let herself smile faintly, the tension in her shoulders finally easing. The room had shifted, but she knew the night wasn't over. The elderly woman stepped closer, voice soft, almost conspiratorial, yet loud enough to carry to Hilda. "What are you going to do now?" The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. Every guest seemed to sense that Hilda's next move could define the rest of the evening, the story, maybe even the trajectory of her own life. Hilda looked down briefly at her hand on her belly, then back at the woman, a glint of determination lighting her eyes. The crowd waited. The phones continued recording. Every whisper held tension. And in that charged pause, the true power of choice settled on her shoulders. Not humiliation, not fear, not revenge, but the opportunity to build something enduring from the ruins of the chaos. Every heart in the room leaned in, every viewer online poised for what would happen next. And just like that, the question wasn't whether justice had arrived, it was how Hilda would shape her next chapter. The ballroom was finally quiet. The clinking of glasses, the murmur of whispers, the frantic typing of phones, all faded into a soft hum of exhausted energy. Chairs had been moved. Tables shifted. The chaos had ebbed, leaving a new rhythm, almost serene in contrast to the storm that had just passed. Hilda leaned against the wall near the exit, hand resting gently on her belly. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting herself breathe, letting herself feel the weight lift. The humiliation, the threats, the pressure, all of it had burned away in the fire of truth and consequence. The elderly woman approached slowly, cane tapping lightly against the floor, but her presence carried warmth rather than authority. "You did well tonight," she said softly, voice rough with age but steady. "I've seen it before. I was once where you were, ignored, humiliated, told my voice didn't matter. And I couldn't stand it. I can't watch another woman go through the same thing." Hilda opened her eyes, meeting the woman's gaze. I didn't expect anyone to care. Or notice." "I noticed," the woman replied, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "And now the world has noticed too." They shared a quiet laugh, almost comic in its relief, a momentary release after a night of tension. Somewhere across the room, a waiter tripped over a chair and muttered, "I hope I'm not next," eliciting a chuckle from a few lingering guests. Hilda allowed herself a full smile, letting the tension in her shoulders melt. She looked toward the edge of the room, where Susan and Felix had been taken away, escorted by officers. A strange mixture of satisfaction and closure settled in her chest. It wasn't revenge anymore, it was clarity. The man she had once considered in her life, emotionally and tangibly, was gone. She could let go without guilt. She could release the ties that had bound her, emotionally, to someone unworthy of her trust. "You've done more than survive," the elderly woman continued. "You've turned humiliation into strength, and strength into action. That's rare." Hilda's lips quivered slightly, and she glanced down at her belly. I don't want anyone else to feel powerless. Pregnant or not, no one should ever be treated this way. Especially when they're vulnerable." The elderly woman nodded knowingly. "I understand completely. I couldn't watch it happen to me again, and I won't watch it happen to another woman. That's why I want to offer you something." Hilda tilted her head, curious but cautious. "Something?" "Yes," the woman said, reaching into her bag and pulling out a small notebook, slightly worn but full of notes and plans. "Let's build something from this. An organization. A foundation. Help women like you, pregnant, vulnerable, silenced, find their voices, find their power. I've done it once before, but I need someone with your fire." Hilda's eyes widened slightly. A mix of awe, disbelief, and excitement flooded her. She could feel the shift inside her, not just relief from what had happened tonight, but a surge of purpose she hadn't felt in years. "And you'd really want me?" she asked quietly. "I wouldn't be offering if I didn't believe in you," the woman replied. Her eyes glimmered with both pride and empathy. "You turned the tables tonight, not just on them, but on a world that sometimes pretends power belongs only to the cruel. You belong to the world now, Hilda." The room around them had started to clear, guests moving toward the exits, still whispering about what they had witnessed. But Hilda didn't move. She stayed rooted in that moment, listening, learning, absorbing the strength being passed to her. She let herself exhale fully for the first time all night, a sense of liberation washing over her. For the first time in months, or maybe years, she felt like she could breathe without tension, without fear. She felt like she could laugh, even a little, without the weight of humiliation pressing down. Then the elderly woman leaned closer, a conspiratorial glint in her eyes. "So," she said softly, "what do you say? Shall we turn tonight's chaos into a legacy? Hilda's lips curved into a small but determined smile. She placed her hand on the notebook, then over her belly, feeling both the future she carried and the future she could shape. "Let's do it," she said, voice calm but resolute. The elderly woman nodded, her smile widening. "Good. Because the world needs you. And tonight was only the beginning." The energy in the room shifted subtly. It wasn't just relief anymore, it was potential, purpose, and the quiet thrill of justice transformed into action. Phones were still recording, but now they were capturing hope, empowerment, and the birth of a new mission. Hilda and the woman exchanged one last look, a silent pact forming in the midst of the quiet aftermath. Laughter from a misstepped waiter echoed in the distance, blending with whispers of admiration. The night had turned from humiliation into opportunity, from fear into power, from chaos into purpose. And just as Hilda straightened, the elderly woman whispered, "What we build will change lives. But first, we start here." The morning sun filtered through the office windows of the newly minted NGO, casting a warm glow over walls lined with posters of courage, hope, and resilience. Hilda stood at the center of the room, hands clasped over her belly, eyes scanning the small but determined team of women bustling around. Files were being sorted, calls made, laptops tapped, a quiet symphony of action and purpose. It had taken months of planning, sleepless nights, and relentless energy, but every corner of this space screamed possibility. Each woman here had a story. Each woman had faced a moment where the world had tried to silence her. And now, under Hilda's guidance, that voice would be amplified. A volunteer, a young woman barely older than 20, peeked nervously around a stack of pamphlets. I didn't know anyone would listen," she whispered. Hilda smiled, bending slightly to meet her gaze. "Then you're in the right place. Here, every voice matters. Every story counts. And no one gets to take that away from you." A chuckle rose from a corner as a slightly older volunteer tripped over a box of office supplies. "I thought I was bringing order. Turns out I brought slapstick," she said, laughter threading through the room. It was a small moment of comic relief, a release in an otherwise intense environment, and everyone joined in, lightening the weight of months of tension and trauma. Hilda's phone buzzed with messages from donors, allies, and women seeking help. She scanned the notes, feeling a surge of both responsibility and excitement. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about transformation, empowerment, and legacy. She stepped toward a whiteboard, picking up a marker. On it, she wrote 3 words, big and bold: voice, power, choice. Each word carried the weight of the night at the gala, the fall of Susan and Felix, and the hope she now carried forward. The elderly woman who had guided her that night entered quietly, leaning on her cane but moving with purpose. "Look at this," she said softly, gesturing toward the bustling room. "This is what happens when courage meets opportunity. You took a moment of pain and turned it into a movement. That's legacy." Hilda laughed softly, a sound free from tension. "I couldn't have done it alone. And I wouldn't have survived without your guidance." The elderly woman's eyes sparkled. "You didn't just survive. You changed the narrative. And soon, the world will hear every story that needs telling." The door opened, and a group of women from the community stepped in, faces tentative but hopeful. One young mother clutched her child close, eyes bright with cautious optimism. Another teenager peeked in, backpack slung low, curiosity mixed with fear. Hilda moved toward them, kneeling slightly to meet their eyes. "You belong here," she said, her voice soft but commanding. "No one can take your worth from you. No one can silence your story. Not today. Not ever." The volunteers rallied around, handing out forms, offering warm smiles, and creating a space of safety and empowerment. Laughter, tears, and quiet determination filled the air, layering the moment with genuine human emotion. Hilda paused for a second, breathing deeply. Her mind drifted back to the gala, the humiliation, the threats, the gasps of the crowd, the chaos. And she realized how far she had come. Not just in power, not just in recognition, but in understanding the real currency of life. Integrity, courage, and compassion. She straightened, her hand resting over her belly, feeling the life within her and the life she was building outside. Turning to the room, she spoke, her voice carrying over the quiet hum of action. They tried to shame me in a room full of people, but I walked out with something they could never take, my voice. And now, we make sure every woman has hers too. The room erupted in applause, smiles bright, tears streaming. Phones lifted again, capturing the moment, but this time, not for scandal, only to witness hope in motion. Hilda glanced toward the elderly woman, who gave her a subtle nod, pride and approval shining in her eyes. The world had shifted, but the real victory was personal, intimate, and unstoppable. She turned to the team, laughter and chatter rising around her. "Okay," she said with a grin. "Now let's build a world that doesn't scare women. And if we trip over the occasional box or spill a little coffee, well, that's part of the fun." The team laughed, relief washing through them. Comic relief mingled with hope, a perfect counterpoint to the intensity that had brought them here. If you've ever been silenced, humiliated, or told your voice didn't matter, subscribe and follow. There's power in witnessing courage, in standing up, and in building a life that honors your story. Every one of you can be the change you've been waiting for. The office was alive with activity, women working together, planning, dreaming. Sunlight spilling through the windows, bouncing off posters, whiteboards, and hearts ready to change the world. They tried to shame her in a room full of people, but she walked out with something they could never take, her voice. Subscribe and follow for more stories of courage, justice, and empowerment, because your story deserves to be heard too.